Man comes home earlier and sees the triplets in the rain. His new wife had left. Brandon Wilson never imagined that day would change his life forever. The sales executive had decided to leave the office early in Naperville to surprise Heather, his wife of just 8 months, with tickets to the play she had been wanting to see at the Civic Theater. But as he turned the corner onto his street in the Willow Creek neighborhood, the scene he encountered made him stop abruptly. His 6-year-old triplet sons, Ethan, Noah, and Mason, were huddled together at the entrance of the house, completely drenched by the heavy rain that had been falling for almost an hour. Their little colorful t-shirts, blue, yellow, and red, clung to their trembling bodies, and their wet hair dripped water down their tear-streaked faces. Brandon dropped his briefcase on the wet ground and ran to the boys, who began crying even harder when they saw him. "Daddy, Aunt Heather told us to wait out here," said Ethan, the oldest by 3 minutes, his voice choked. "She said we could only go inside when you got home," added Noah, shivering from the cold. Mason, the quietest of the three, just clung tightly to his father's legs as if afraid he might leave again. Brandon felt his chest tighten. With trembling hands, he grabbed the keys from his pocket and quickly opened the door, ushering the boys into the warm house. "Go take a warm bath right now," he ordered, trying to control the anger growing in his chest. As the children went upstairs, leaving a trail of water behind, Brandon called out for his wife in every room of the house. Total silence. In the kitchen, on the oak table that had been a wedding gift from his mother-in-law, he found a note written in Heather's careful handwriting. "I can't stand these spoiled, ill-mannered children anymore. I'll return when you've put them in their place and given me the respect I deserve as the woman of this house. Heather." Brandon's hands shook as he held the paper. 8 months. Only 8 months of marriage, and he was already discovering who Heather really was behind that sweet smile that had won him over at the tennis club. He rushed upstairs and found his 3 sons still in the bath, helping each other out of their wet clothes. The scene moved and enraged him at the same time. How could Heather do that to such young children? "Daddy, this has happened before," whispered Ethan as Brandon helped them dry off. "What do you mean before?" "When you go to work, Aunt Heather gets angry and tells us to go outside," explained Noah, looking at his brothers as if asking for permission to continue. "She said if we told you, you'd get mad at us and leave forever," added Mason, finally speaking. Brandon knelt in front of the 3, trying to process this information. How long had this been going on? How many times had his children suffered in silence while he was at work, blindly trusting the woman he had married? "Listen carefully," he said, looking each of them in the eye. "You never have to be afraid to tell me anything, okay? Daddy is here to protect you always. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out." Now continuing. That night, after putting the boys to bed, Brandon stayed in the living room, trying to understand how he had been so blind. Heather had come into his life at a vulnerable time, 2 years after losing Amanda, his first wife, who had died from complications during the triplets' birth that the doctors couldn't prevent. He remembered his first meeting with Heather at the club. She had approached him while watching the boys play in the children's pool, complimenting what a dedicated father he was. She seemed genuinely interested in the boys, asked questions about them, brought small gifts. During their 6 months of dating, she was always affectionate and attentive. Brandon spent the night going over every moment, every sign he should have noticed. Now he remembered little things. How Heather always made an excuse not to be alone with the boys for too long during their courtship. How she suggested they stay at their maternal grandmother's house on weekends. How she always changed the subject when he talked about including her more in the children's routine. The next morning, Brandon decided to take the boys to school personally, something he had stopped doing after the marriage, when Heather took over that responsibility. At the school entrance, he met Mrs. Bennett, the 72-year-old neighbor who had lived next door for over 20 years. "Good morning, Brandon," she said, but there was something odd in her voice. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" After the boys entered the school, Mrs. Bennett pulled Brandon aside. "Son, I didn't want to meddle, but I need to tell you something. Several times I've seen your boys outside the house alone, always when you're not around." "What do you mean, several times?" "Well, I write everything down in my little notebook because I'm afraid I'll forget things," she said. taking a small notebook from her purse. "Here, look. The 15th of last month, 2 in the afternoon. The 22nd, noon, last week on Tuesday, around 3 o'clock. Brandon felt his blood run cold as he saw the neighbors' meticulous notes. "I always got worried, but they would go inside the house just a few minutes before you arrived. I thought it was some kind of game, but yesterday when I saw them in the rain, I couldn't stay quiet any longer. Why didn't you tell me before? Oh, son, you never know if you should meddle in family matters, but yesterday was too much. Little children in the rain, shivering from the cold. My heart couldn't take it." Brandon thanked Mrs. Bennet and went home with his mind racing. Heather hadn't returned yet, but that was the least of his concerns now. He needed to understand the extent of what was happening. He called the office and asked for a few days off, citing a family emergency. His boss, Richard, an understanding man and father of 2 daughters, asked no questions and approved it immediately. During the day, Brandon visited 3 electronics stores until he found what he was looking for: small, discreet cameras he could install around the house. If Heather was mistreating his children, he needed proof. When the boys returned from school, Brandon prepared their favorite snack, grilled cheese sandwiches and hot chocolate, and sat at the kitchen table for a serious talk. "Boys, Daddy needs you to tell me everything that happens when I'm not here." The 3 exchanged glances, clearly afraid. "Aunt Heather said that if we told, you would get very angry and would look for another family," murmured Noah. "She said that fathers of badly behaved boys always abandon their children," added Ethan. Brandon felt a mix of anger and sadness like he had never experienced before. He took a deep breath, remembering that he needed to stay calm so the boys would feel safe to talk. "Look at Daddy," he said, kneeling in front of their chairs. "I would never ever abandon you. You are the most important thing in my life." Aunt Heather was lying when she said that. Gradually, like a dam finally breaking, the words started to pour out. They told him about the constant yelling when Brandon left for work, about how Heather threw away the drawings they made for their father, about how she locked them in their room for hours when they made any noise. She said that if we wet the bed, she'd send us to a place with no mom or dad, told Mason, his eyes filled with tears. "And she tore up the picture of Mommy Amanda that was in our room," said Ethan. "Said we had to forget her because now she was our mother." Brandon had to leave the kitchen for a few minutes so he wouldn't explode in front of the children. In the backyard, he punched the house wall until he hurt his knuckles. How had he been so blind? How hadn't he noticed that the woman he fell in love with was capable of such cruelty with defenseless children? When he returned, the boys were hugging each other, clearly frightened by his reaction. Brandon composed himself and hugged them tightly. "Forgive Daddy for not noticing sooner. But now I know and I will protect you. You can be sure of that." That night, after putting the children to sleep, Brandon called his mother-in-law, Mrs. Stevens, a 65-year-old woman who had always been affectionate with her grandchildren, but who in recent months seemed more distant. "Mr. Brandon, what a surprise. Is Heather there with you?" "No, Mrs. Stevens. Actually, I need to talk to you about some things I found out today." "Found out what?" Her voice immediately became defensive. Brandon told her everything he had discovered, hoping to find an ally, someone who could help resolve that situation. But Mrs. Stevens' reaction completely surprised him. "Brandon, my daughter tells me everything. Those boys are impossible. They throw tantrums all the time. They don't respect her. Heather is a saint for putting up with triplets that aren't hers. Mrs. Stevens, they are 6-year-old children. Children who need a firm hand. You're too soft with them, Brandon. Amanda spoiled them too much before, well, you know, Heather is trying to raise them right." "Are you telling me you think it's normal to leave 6-year-old children in the rain?" "Sometimes a lesson is necessary. My daughter isn't mean. She just wants them to learn to respect her authority in the house." Brandon hung up the phone in shock. Now he understood where Heather had learned that behavior. His wife's entire family seemed to think child mistreatment was just discipline. Heather returned 3 days later with a performance worthy of an actress. Tears, apologies, promises of change. She said she had spent the days at her mother's house, reflecting on her mistakes. "Honey, I know I went too far. It's just that they challenge me so much. I get nervous, but I promise I will change. I will seek help. I will go to therapy." Brandon listened to her in silence, watching every gesture, every expression. The woman he had married was truly an excellent actress. "It's okay, Heather. We'll try again." She smiled with relief, not suspecting that during the days of her absence, Brandon had installed cameras in every room of the house. In the following days, Heather made an effort to be the perfect wife. She prepared elaborate breakfasts, took the boys to school with smiles, made special dinners. But Brandon noticed the tension in her movements, as if she were playing a role that bothered her. The triplets, in turn, seemed to walk on eggshells around the house, as if they expected the bomb to explode again at any moment. It was in the second week that Brandon had to travel to Hartford for 2 days, a business trip he couldn't cancel. He left on Monday morning, after kissing the children and giving one last meaningful look to Heather. "Take good care of them," he said, more as a warning than a request. "Of course, honey. Don't worry." On Tuesday night, alone in the hotel in Hartford, Brandon opened the camera app on his phone. What he saw made his stomach turn. Heather was screaming at the boys because Noah had spilled juice on the kitchen floor. She forced them to stand against the living room wall for over 2 hours, forbidding them from using the bathroom or drinking water. "You're going to learn to respect this house," she screamed. "And if anyone tells your father, I'll say you're lying. Who do you think he'll believe? His wife or some brats who make up stories?" Brandon recorded everything, every second of that psychological torture. But the worst was yet to come. The next morning, even before returning to Naperville, he received a call from the school. "Mr. Wilson, this is Jennifer from the administration. Can you come pick up the boys? They're very agitated today." "Agitated how?" "Ethan vomited during class, Noah won't stop crying, and Mason can't speak properly. They're saying they don't want to go home." Brandon cancelled all his meetings and drove the 3 hours back to Naperville like a madman. At school, he found his 3 sons clinging to their teacher, Mrs. Wilson, a 50-year-old woman who had been teaching for over 20 years. "Mr. Wilson, I need to speak with you. The children arrived acting very strange today. Mason said their stepmother threw their toys in the trash because they made a mess. And there's more," the teacher continued, showing some drawings. "They made these pictures in art class." The drawings showed 3 small figures and 1 large dark figure. The large figure had a wide-open red mouth as if screaming. The small figures were always crying or hiding. "Mrs. Wilson, can I count on you if I need help protecting my children?" The teacher held his hand. "Of course, Brandon. These children are special, and anyone with eyes in their head can see their suffering." That afternoon, Brandon arrived home with the boys and found Heather washing dishes, humming as if nothing had happened. "Hi, honey. You're home early again. How was the trip?" "It was fine. Heather, we need to talk." "Of course. Boys, go play in your room while Mommy and Daddy talk." The triplets hurried upstairs, clearly relieved to escape their stepmother's presence. "Heather, the boys told me some things that have me worried." Her face instantly changed, the sweet mask disappearing for a split second before returning. "Brandon, I warned you they make up stories. Children do that for attention. You know that. They told me you throw their toys away. I organize the toys when they make a mess. It's different. And about leaving them in the rain yesterday." Heather sighed dramatically. They had completely disobeyed Brandon. They made a terrible mess in the living room, and when I told them to clean it up, they talked back. I thought staying outside for a little bit would make them reflect. In the rain, Heather. They were in the rain. It wasn't for that long. And look, it worked. Today they're better behaved. Brandon watched his wife trying to justify the unjustifiable and felt disgusted. How had he fallen in love with this person? "I think it's best you go back to your mother's house for a few days. I need time to think." Heather's face twisted in anger. "You're choosing these brats over your wife, typical. Amanda did the same thing, always put them first instead of taking proper care of the marriage." The mention of Amanda was the last straw. Brandon rose from his chair, trying to control the urge to shout, "Never speak my late wife's name again, and yes, I'm choosing my children. I will always choose them." Heather grabbed some clothes and left the house, but not before making one final threat. "You'll regret this, Brandon. I won't let this slide. Those boys are going to find out what it's like to be without a real mother figure. In the days that followed, Heather began a quiet campaign against Brandon. She called mutual acquaintances, telling her version of the story. A father who worked too much left his children without proper supervision and was now paranoid, making up stories about his own wife. Brandon found out about this when Richard, his boss, called him for a private conversation. "Brandon, I got a strange call yesterday. A woman who claimed to be your wife told me you were going through a crisis and might not be well enough to work." "Richard, I can explain everything." And Brandon told him everything. He showed the footage from the cameras, the children's drawings, and told him about the conversation with Mrs. Bennett. Richard, who was also a father, was horrified. "Brandon, you have my full support. If you need time off, a leave, anything, those children need to be protected." But Heather's campaign was just beginning. She showed up at the boys' school, talked to other mothers, planting doubts about Brandon's ability as a father. Some mothers began to look at him with suspicion during pickup time. "Is it true that you're having psychological problems?" asked Courtney, the mother of one of the triplets' classmates. "Courtney, my ex-wife is spreading lies about me because I found out she was mistreating my children." "Oh, Brandon, but she seems so sweet. Are you sure it's not a misunderstanding?" That phrase echoed in Brandon's head for days. How did Heather manage to maintain that facade of a kind person even after everything she had done? The answer came when Mrs. Bennett brought some disturbing information. "Brandon, I spoke with my friend Betty, who lives over in Rosewood Heights. She knows Heather from there. She said she was married before to a widower who had 2 small children. And what happened? The marriage lasted less than a year. The man caught her mistreating the children, and she went around saying he was violent, that he hit her. Betty said she never believed it, because she had known the man since he was a boy." Brandon felt the ground give way beneath him. Heather was a predator who specialized in widowers with small children. She had probably chosen him at the tennis club for exactly that reason. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. He decided to investigate further. Through a friend who worked in human resources, he got Heather's professional history. He discovered that she had worked as a nanny for several families over the past 5 years, but never stayed more than a few months at each job. Brandon called 2 of the previous families. The first woman, Caroline, hesitated to talk at first, but then opened up. "Look, I don't like to speak ill of anyone, but your wife, she wasn't affectionate with my daughter. My little girl started having nightmares and didn't want to be alone with Heather anymore. And why did you let her go? I came home early one day and found my daughter locked in the bathroom crying. Heather said she had thrown a tantrum, but a 4-year-old locked in a dark bathroom, I didn't think it was normal." The second family confirmed a similar pattern. Heather always started off well, but gradually showed signs of impatience and cruelty toward the children. Armed with this information, Brandon sought out a lawyer. Attorney Thomas Reynolds, a man experienced in family law, reviewed all the evidence. "Brandon, you have a solid case. The footage, the testimonies, her history. But be prepared, because this type of person doesn't give up easily." And Attorney Thomas was right. A week later, Brandon received an unexpected visit at work. A social worker named Diane showed up with a formal complaint. "Mr. Wilson, we received an anonymous complaint claiming that you are neglecting your children and turning them against your wife. What do you mean?" "The complaint says you leave the children alone at home, that they arrive at school dirty, and that they are being pressured to make up stories about mistreatment." Brandon almost fainted. Heather had turned the tables, using his own accusations against him. "Diane, may I show you some things?" Brandon presented all the videos, Mrs. Bennett's notes, the statements from previous families. Diane, an experienced professional, analyzed everything carefully. "Mr. Wilson, clearly someone is trying to manipulate the system. I will file this complaint and open an investigation into who made it." But the damage was done. Brandon started getting strange looks from co-workers. Some clients canceled meetings. Heather had managed to plant seeds of doubt about his professional reputation. The triplets, sensing the tension at home, began showing signs of stress. Ethan developed a nervous stutter he didn't have before. Noah started wetting the bed again. Mason stopped speaking completely, communicating only through gestures. Brandon sought help from a child psychologist, Dr. Sarah Matthews, a specialist in childhood trauma. After a few sessions with the boys, she requested a private conversation with the father. "Brandon, your children have suffered severe psychological abuse. Mason's mutism is a typical response to trauma. Ethan's stutter and Noah's regression are also clear signs. Will they recover? Yes, but it will take time, and it's essential that they feel completely safe. Any contact with the person who caused the trauma could make things worse." Dr. Sarah wrote a detailed report about the boy's psychological state, which Brandon gave to his attorney. It was another important piece for the divorce proceedings he had decided to start. But Heather didn't stay idle. One morning, Brandon received a call at work. "Mr. Wilson, this is your children's school. Your wife came to pick up the boys early, said they had a doctor's appointment." Brandon's blood ran cold. "What wife? I didn't authorize anyone to pick up my children." "But sir, she is on the list of authorized people." Brandon rushed to the school, but it was too late. Heather had taken the triplets, and no one knew where. He immediately called attorney Thomas Reynolds, who advised him to contact the police. But since Heather was still legally his wife, the situation became complicated. "She could claim she just took her stepchildren for an outing," explained the detective. "Technically, it's not kidnapping, but I have proof that she mistreats them. Mr. Wilson, we will do what we can. But as long as she is your wife, the situation is delicate." Brandon spent the longest night of his life calling all of Heather's contacts, his mother-in-law, anyone who might know where she was. Mrs. Stevens answered on the third try. "She's not here, Brandon. And even if she were, after the way you treated my daughter, I wouldn't tell you. Mrs. Stevens, please, they're just children. Children you are raising to hate my daughter. Heather told me everything, how you made up these absurd stories about mistreatment." The next morning, Mrs. Bennett knocked on Brandon's door with valuable information. "Son, I saw Heather arriving here last night, but she didn't bring the boys. She only stayed half an hour and left with a suitcase. Do you have any idea where she might have left them? I have a suspicion. Do you know Sunshine Daycare downtown? My granddaughter works there. Yesterday she called me saying a woman had dropped off 3 twin boys there, saying their father was traveling and she had a family emergency." Brandon flew to the daycare. He found the triplets crying in the cafeteria, huddled together, eating a snack they could barely swallow between sobs. "Daddy!" all 3 shouted at once, running into his arms. "She said you weren't coming back," cried Ethan. "That we were going to stay here forever," added Noah. Mason just clung to his father and wouldn't let go. The daycare coordinator, Sister Margaret, a 70-year-old woman with decades of experience, pulled Brandon aside for a talk. "Son, I've worked with children for 40 years. I know when a child is suffering. These 3 are clearly traumatized. Did the woman who brought them say anything strange?" "She said they were difficult, that you didn't know what to do with them anymore. But looking at these children, all I see are scared little boys who need affection." Brandon took his sons home and made a definitive decision. He called attorney Thomas Reynolds and urgently filed for divorce and a restraining order against Heather. "I want her away from my children forever," he said. "We'll get this done, Brandon. With all the evidence we have, the judge will understand the seriousness of the situation." But Heather wasn't willing to give up. In the following days, she showed up several times on their street, outside the gate, trying to talk to the boys when they played in the yard. "Ethan! Noah! Mason! Auntie missed you so much," she shouted from the gate. The boys ran inside the house, terrified. Brandon had to install a taller fence and ask Mrs. Bennett to keep an eye out when he needed to go out. The situation got more complicated when Heather started showing up at the school too. The principal had to take special measures to protect the triplets. "Mr. Wilson, we're going to have to ask that a family member pick up the children until this is resolved," said the principal. "We can't take any risks." That's when Brandon remembered his sister, Rebecca, who lived in Long Beach. Rebecca was a preschool teacher, 42 years old, divorced, and had always been very close to her nephews. "Brandon, of course I can help," she said when he called explaining the situation. "I'll request a transfer to a school there in Naperville, and stay with you all for a few months." Rebecca's arrival brought immense relief to the whole family. The boys adored their aunt, who had a special way with children, and got Mason to start talking again in just 1 week. "He was afraid that if he spoke, something bad would happen," Rebecca explained to Brandon. "But now he's understanding that he can trust us." It was Rebecca who suggested group therapy for the triplets, where they could talk about their feelings alongside other children who had been through difficult situations. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. But Heather didn't give up. She hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit against Brandon, alleging abandonment and asking for child support. According to her, she had left her career to care for her stepchildren and was now destitute. At the first hearing, Heather gave an Oscar-worthy performance. She cried, claimed she had suffered psychological abuse from her husband, said the boys had been instructed to lie about her. "Your Honor, I love these children as if they were my own," she said, wiping away crocodile tears. "It's painful to be accused of mistreating children I tried to care for with so much affection." The judge, Judge Harrison, a man in his 60s, seemed impressed by Heather's performance. Brandon began to feel desperate, thinking she would manage to deceive everyone once again. But attorney Thomas Reynolds was prepared. He presented all the videos, recordings, testimonies from previous families, the child psychologist's report, and the written statement from Mrs. Bennett. "Your Honor, we have a clear pattern of behavior here. The petitioner has a history of relationships with widowed men who have small children, and there are always reports of mistreatment." When the videos were played in the courtroom, the silence was deafening. Even Heather's lawyer seemed embarrassed seeing the footage of his client yelling at the children. That was taken out of context, she tried to argue. They had done something very serious. "Mrs. Parker," the judge interrupted, "there is no context that justifies leaving 6-year-old children in the rain or depriving them of water and bathroom access for hours." But the most impactful moment of the hearing happened when attorney Thomas Reynolds requested to hear from the children. In a special room adapted for minors, the triplets spoke with a court-appointed psychologist. Mason, who had started speaking again, was the bravest. "Aunt Heather yelled at us a lot. She said our daddy didn't love us anymore because of us." "And did you believe that?" asked the psychologist. "We were afraid it might be true," said Noah, "because she was very angry and said she knew things we didn't." Ethan added, "She hid the bad things when Daddy came home, pretended to be nice, but when he left, she became a different person." When the content of this conversation was presented to the judge, Heather's situation became untenable. Judge Harrison was clear in his decision. "It has been clearly demonstrated that the petitioner committed psychological abuse against minors. The alimony request is denied, the divorce is granted, and I issue a permanent restraining order. You may no longer approach these children." Heather exploded in the courtroom. "This is an injustice. Those ill-mannered boys made it all up. Brandon is behind all this." But her words only confirmed what everyone already knew. She was escorted out of the court by security, shouting threats that no longer frightened anyone. In the following months, Brandon and the triplets' lives slowly began to rebuild. Rebecca decided to stay permanently in Naperville, renting a nearby house to help whenever needed. The boys started playing in the yard again, laughing loudly, making messes around the house. Brandon learned to see that mess as music to his ears, a sign that his children were reclaiming the childhood Heather had tried to steal. Mrs. Bennett became like a grandmother to the boys. Every evening, they ran to the fence separating the houses to tell her about their day at school. She always had a candy or a story to share. "You know, Brandon," she said one day while watering the plants, "I raised 5 children, and I can tell you one thing. Happy children make noise. When your boys got too quiet, I knew something was wrong." School also became a safe environment again. Mrs. Wilson created special activities to help the triplets express their feelings through art. Their drawings gradually changed. The dark figures disappeared and were replaced by colorful houses with a smiling family. But the healing process wasn't linear. There were nights when all 3 woke up crying, with nightmares about Heather coming back to get them. Brandon learned to handle these moments, hugging each one, explaining once again that they were safe. "Dad, what if she comes back when you're at work?" asked Ethan one night after a particularly intense nightmare. "Son, she can't come near you anymore. The judge forbade it, and besides, Aunt Rebecca is always nearby." "But what if she doesn't obey?" Brandon realized the children needed more concrete safety measures. He installed an intercom at the door, taught the boys to never open the door for strangers, and made an arrangement with 3 neighbors to keep an eye on the house during the day. He also changed his work routine. Richard, his boss, allowed him to do more tasks from home and reduce his travels. The company even created an internal daycare where Brandon could take the children on some special days. "Family is the priority, Brandon," said Richard. "An employee with a stable family is a more productive and happier employee." 6 months after the divorce, Brandon received an unexpected call. It was Amanda, Heather's former employer, whom he had interviewed months before. "Brandon, I don't know if this matters to you, but Heather showed up here yesterday looking for a job again." "Really?" "She said she had gotten divorced because her husband was violent. She asked for work references. Of course I refused, but I was worried. She might be looking for another family to deceive." Brandon discussed this with attorney Thomas Reynolds. The lawyer suggested they discreetly alert some local nanny agencies and schools about Heather's background. "We can't officially defame her," explained the lawyer, "but we can ensure that true information reaches the right people." That's how they found out that Heather had already gotten a new job, taking care of the children of a widowed engineer in Evanston. Brandon felt a tightening in his heart, imagining other children going through what his sons had endured. He decided to call the man directly, Michael Stevens, father of 2 girls aged 4 and 7. "Michael, I know you don't know me, but I need to tell you a few things about Heather Parker." "Heather? She's been working here for 2 weeks. Why?" "Because she was my wife, and she almost destroyed my children." Brandon told the whole story, offered the evidence, the contacts of previous families. Michael, initially suspicious, asked for a few days to verify the information. A week later, Michael called back. "Brandon, you saved my daughters. I was already noticing strange things. They were becoming very quiet, scared. I fired Heather yesterday." "Did she take it well?" "No. She said I would regret it, that my daughters were impossible and that no woman would want a man with problematic children. But after everything you told me, I understood that was exactly her pattern." Brandon felt relieved knowing he had protected other children, but also worried. Heather would continue looking for new victims. It was Rebecca who had the idea of creating an informal support group for single and widowed parents in the area. "Brandon, if we share experiences, we can prevent other families from going through what you went through." The group started small, meeting at Brandon's house once a week. Mrs. Bennett would prepare coffee and cake while the parents talked about the challenges of raising children alone and how to identify people who might not have good intentions. Michael joined the group along with 3 other fathers from the area. They created a support network where they shared information about nannies, tutors, and even potential romantic partners. "It's sad to have to be so cautious," said Michael during one of the meetings. "But our children depend on us to protect them." 1 year after the divorce, the triplets were unrecognizable. Ethan had completely lost his stutter, Noah no longer wet the bed, and Mason was a chatty and cheerful child. At school, they became class leaders, always helping other classmates who were going through difficulties. Mrs. Wilson commented to Brandon about the incredible transformation. "Your children have become the most empathetic kids in the class. I believe the suffering they went through made them more sensitive to others' pain." Brandon started noticing this too. When a co-worker was going through a difficult divorce, the boys asked if she had children and if they were sad. "Dad, if she wants, she can bring the kids to play here at our house," suggested Noah. "We know what it's like to be sad." Their children's generosity moved Brandon deeply. They had transformed pain into compassion, something not all adults managed to do. Mrs. Bennett, who had become a constant presence in the family's life, started teaching the boys to cook on Sundays. It was a special project of hers. Every man needs to know how to take care of himself and his family, she'd say, teaching them to make the chocolate cake that was her great-grandmother's recipe. The triplets loved these moments. They'd argue over who got to crack the eggs, who got to stir the batter, who got to lick the bowl. It was organized chaos that filled the house with life. Watching these scenes, Brandon realized they had built a true family. Not traditional, but real. Rebecca was like a second mother. Mrs. Bennet was the grandmother they'd chosen, and the four of them were the unbreakable core. 2 years later, Brandon was in the backyard playing soccer with his sons when Mrs. Bennet appeared at the fence with news. "Brandon, I saw Heather walking down our street this morning." His heart raced, but then calmed when he saw the boys hadn't even stopped playing. They were safe now, confident their father would always protect them. "How did she look, Mrs. Bennet?" "Different. She seemed defeated. I don't know if she saw you playing, but she stood there watching for a few minutes before leaving." Brandon never heard about Heather again. He heard rumors she'd moved to another town, perhaps looking for new targets where her past wouldn't be known. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the present he'd built with so much effort. That night, while putting the children to bed, Mason asked a question that touched his father's heart deeply. "Dad, do you think Mom Amanda is happy that we're doing well?" Brandon got emotional. It was the first time in a long while that one of the boys mentioned Amanda naturally without pain. "I'm sure she is, son. She's very proud of how brave and caring you've become." "And proud of you too, right, Dad?" said Ethan, "for protecting us." "Very proud," agreed Noah. Brandon kissed each one on the forehead, as he did every night, and went downstairs to the living room where Rebecca was watching television. "They're really doing well, aren't they?" she asked. "They are. Better than I could have imagined. You know you did the right thing, right? It wasn't easy, but you protected them." Brandon sat on the couch, looking out the window at the street illuminated by lampposts. He thought about the journey they'd made together, father and sons, from that terrible rainy day to this moment of peace. "You know, Rebecca, I learned something very important." "What's that?" "That family isn't about having the perfect structure. It's about having people who truly care about each other." Rebecca smiled and changed the channel to a cooking show. "Look, they're teaching how to make carrot cake. How about we learn to make it with the boys on Sunday?" "Good idea. They'll love that." 3 years had passed since the divorce. The triplets, now 9 years old, had become secure, happy, and very close-knit children. Brandon remained single, but not for lack of opportunities. He had simply learned to value the family he already had. One Saturday morning, while the boys played in the yard and Rebecca prepared lunch, the doorbell rang. Brandon answered and found an unfamiliar woman, about 35 years old, with a child of about 5. "Are you Brandon Wilson?" she asked. "I am. How can I help you?" "My name is Rachel. I heard about your story through Michael Stevens. I need your help." Brandon invited her in. Rachel explained she had been a widow for 2 years and had recently married a man who seemed perfect, but was starting to notice strange signs in his behavior with her daughter. "The situations are different, but Michael said you could guide me on how to protect a child when we suspect something is wrong." Brandon spoke with Rachel for 2 hours, sharing everything he had learned about identifying warning signs, collecting evidence, seeking professional help, and especially about trusting a parent's instincts. "The most important thing," he said, "is to always believe your child. They might not know how to explain what's happening, but they know when something is wrong." Rachel left Brandon's house with an action plan and the promise that he would be available to help with whatever was needed. "Brandon," said Rebecca after Rachel left, "do you realize what you're doing?" "How so?" "You're helping other families through your experience. You're turning your suffering into protection for other children." Brandon had never thought of it that way, but Rebecca was right. His painful experience was becoming a way to prevent other families from going through the same thing. The support group grew and became formal. They created a website where parents could share experiences and warnings about people who posed risks to children, always careful not to defame anyone, but sharing important information. "Daddy, why was that lady crying when she left?" asked Mason after Rachel's visit. Because she's worried about her little daughter, son. And are you going to help her like Aunt Rebecca helped us? I'll certainly try. That's good, said Ethan. It's important to help children who are sad. Brandon was moved by his son's maturity. They had truly turned the traumatic experience into genuine empathy for others. On the 4th anniversary of the divorce, Brandon organized a special party at home. He invited all the people who had helped during the difficult times: Mrs. Bennett, Richard and his family, attorney Thomas Reynolds, Dr. Sarah Matthews, the families from the support group. This party is to thank all of you, he said, raising a glass of soda, for helping us rebuild our family. Dad, interrupted Noah, we want to say something too. The 3 boys stood side by side, clearly having prepared something. We wanted to thank you, said Ethan, for being brave and protecting us. Even when it was hard, added Noah. And for never giving up on us, finished Mason. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Mrs. Bennett wiped her tears with her apron. Rebecca smiled emotionally, and Brandon fought not to cry in front of everyone. You are my heroes, he managed to say, all 3 of you. All. The party continued with the adults talking in the backyard while the children played. Brandon observed that moment of happiness, remembering the dark days when he thought he would never see his children smile like that again. Richard approached him with a beer in hand. Brandon, can I say something? I really admire what you did. I don't know if I would have had the courage to face all that. Richard, when it's your children, you find courage you didn't even know you had. That's true, and look at the result. These boys are special. At the office, everyone talks about how well-behaved they are when they come to visit. Brandon smiled. The triplets had truly become special children, not just for the difficulties they overcame, but for the character they developed in the process. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, a month after the party, Brandon received a call he wasn't expecting. It was Rachel, the woman who had sought his help. Brandon, you saved my daughter. How so? I followed all your guidance. I installed cameras, spoke with the school, found a psychologist. I discovered my husband really was mistreating Sophie. I got the divorce and full custody. I'm so happy to hear that, Rachel. But that's not all. I met other mothers in similar situations during the process. We're thinking about expanding your support group to include mothers too. The idea excited Brandon. Within a few months, the group had grown significantly. They rented a small community hall in downtown Naperville for the weekly meetings. Rebecca became the group's educational coordinator, creating activities for the children while the parents talked. Mrs. Bennett became the official grandma to all the children, always arriving with treats and stories. The group began receiving attention from the local media. A report in the city newspaper highlighted the prevention work they were doing. Family Protection Network helps parents identify warning signs, was the headline. Brandon was interviewed, but made sure to keep the focus on the group's work, not his personal story. Our goal is simple, he said in the interview. We want no child to have to suffer in silence. The report brought visibility to the group, and they began receiving invitations to give talks at schools and companies. Brandon discovered he had a talent for speaking publicly about child protection. The triplets, now 10 years old, were proud when they saw their father being interviewed, or when schoolmates commented on the family's work. Dad, you've become famous, Ethan joked after a report on local television. Not famous, son, just doing what's right. But it's cool to know other kids are being protected because of what we're doing, said Noah. Mason, always the most thoughtful, made an observation that surprised everyone. Dad, if Aunt Heather hadn't been mean to us, you never would have learned to help other families. The depth of the observation left Brandon speechless. His 10-year-old son had found a positive purpose in the suffering they had endured. That's true, Mason. Sometimes bad things happen so we can learn to do good things. So our sadness turned into happiness for other children? Exactly. That night, Brandon reflected on Mason's words. They had truly transformed trauma into purpose, pain into protection for others. The support group continued to grow. They created educational pamphlets about warning signs in relationships, workshops on communicating with children, and even a helpline for guidance. Dr. Sarah Matthews, the psychologist who had treated the triplets, officially joined the project, offering free consultations for at-risk families. "Brandon, you've created something very important," she said during a meeting. "You're preventing trauma instead of just treating it after it happens." The group's work began to receive official recognition. The Naperville City Council created a partnership to expand the project to other areas of the city. "It's amazing how one family can turn a painful experience into protection for so many others," said the Secretary of Social Assistance during the recognition ceremony. Brandon was on stage holding the certificate of recognition when he saw his 3 sons in the audience, applauding with pride. Rebecca was standing beside them, with Mrs. Bennett, Michael and Rachel, and dozens of other families who had been helped by the project. At that moment, he understood that his life had found a new purpose. He was no longer just the father protecting his children. He was someone using his experience to protect every child he could reach. 5 years after the divorce, Brandon received an unexpected call. It was Heather. "Brandon, we need to talk." Her voice sounded different. It no longer had that false sweetness he remembered. "We have nothing to talk about, Heather. The restraining order is still in effect." "I know, but I wanted to apologize." Brandon almost hung up, but something in her voice made him hesitate. "Apologize?" "I've been in therapy, Brandon. A lot of therapy. I realized I was repeating things I experienced in my childhood. It's not an excuse, but it's an explanation." "Heather, I don't know what you want me to say." "Nothing. I just wanted you to know that I regret everything I did to your children. They didn't deserve it, and neither did you." "Why are you calling me now?" "Because I saw the news story about your work on television. I saw how you turned everything into something good. It made me realize how much damage I caused." Brandon stayed silent, processing that unexpected conversation. "Heather, I accept your apology, but my children are doing well now. We've built a good life. There's no room for you in it." "I know. I'm not asking for that. I just wanted you to know that I'm really sorry, really." After hanging up, Brandon went upstairs to see his children. He found the 3 of them in Ethan's room doing their homework together, as they always did. "Dad, who was on the phone?" asked Noah, sensing something had affected him. "It was someone from the past, but it's not important." "Was it Heather?" asked Mason, as direct as ever. Brandon hesitated but decided to be honest. "Yes, it was." "And what did she want?" Ethan seemed tense. "She wanted to apologize for what she did to you." The 3 of them stayed quiet for a moment, processing that information. "Did you forgive her, Dad?" asked Mason. "I did, son. But that doesn't change anything in our lives. She's still away from us." "It's good to forgive," said Noah. "Aunt Rebecca always says holding on to anger is bad for the heart. But we don't have to be friends with someone who hurt us," added Ethan, always the practical one. "Exactly. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or trusting again." That night, after the children fell asleep, Brandon talked to Rebecca about Heather's call. "How did you feel hearing from her?" "Strangely relieved. Not because she apologized, but because I realized I don't feel angry at her anymore, just pity." "Pity?" "Pity for someone who lost the chance to get to know 3 amazing children because she was consumed by her own bitterness." Rebecca nodded. "You've grown so much, Brandon. It's not easy to reach that point of peace." "I think working with the group helped me. When you help other people overcome similar situations, you end up understanding your own better." 6 months later, the project had expanded to 5 cities in the metropolitan area. Brandon had become a reference in child protection in the region, receiving invitations for talks and consultations. But what mattered most to him were still the simple moments at home. Sunday mornings baking with Mrs. Bennett, soccer games in the backyard, movie nights cuddled on the couch. The triplets had developed distinct personalities, but kept the special bond they always had. Ethan had become the natural leader, always organizing their games. Noah was the artistic one, always drawing and creating stories. Mason was the most sensitive, always noticing when someone was sad and offering help. At school, they were known as the helper boys. They always welcomed new classmates, always offered support to those going through hard times. "It's funny," commented Mrs. Wilson, who was still their teacher, "how children who suffered so much became so generous." "I think it's because they know what it's like to need help," replied Brandon. "And they know how good it feels when someone offers that help." One day, Mason came home from school with special news. "Dad, there's a new girl in our class. She's really sad because her parents got divorced." "And what did you do?" "We told her that we were also sad when our parents got divorced, but that things got better again." "She said she doesn't believe it will be okay," added Noah. "So we invited her to come play here at our house," said Ethan. "Can she, Dad?" Brandon smiled. His sons were naturally doing what he did with the support group, offering hope to those who were suffering. "Of course she can. Should we call her parents?" The girl, Lily, became a frequent visitor. Her parents, recently divorced, were grateful for the welcome their daughter received at Brandon's house. "Your sons are special," said Ashley, Lily's mother. "They helped my daughter understand that divorce doesn't mean parents stop loving their children. They learned that the hard way," replied Brandon, "but now they use that knowledge to help others." 7 years after that terrible rainy day, Brandon was sitting on his porch watching the triplets, now 13 years old, playing in the yard with Lily and 3 other children from the neighborhood. Rebecca approached with 2 coffees. "You know what amazes me the most about this whole story," she said. "What?" "How you became exactly the opposite of what Heather tried to destroy. She wanted a silent, controlled, lifeless family. And you became a family that spreads life wherever you go." Brandon looked at his children running and laughing in the yard. Ethan was organizing a game to include everyone. Noah was telling a story that made everyone laugh. Mason was comforting a younger child who had fallen. "You know, Rebecca, I used to be afraid that what happened with Heather would mark them forever. And it did, but in a positive way. They learned empathy, resilience, unity. They learned that family is about protecting each other." That night during dinner, Mason asked a question that took Brandon by surprise. "Dad, have you ever thought about getting married again?" "Why do you ask, son?" "Because we wouldn't mind," said Ethan, "if you found someone who was really nice." "Nice and who really liked us," added Noah. "But if you don't ever want to get married again, that's okay too," said Mason. "We're happy like this." Brandon was moved by his son's maturity. They had learned the difference between having someone in the family because you truly love them and having someone just to fill a void. "For now, I'm very happy with the family we have," he said. "You 3, Aunt Rebecca, Mrs. Bennett, it's perfect like this. And if one day you meet someone special, we'll know," said Ethan with adult-like wisdom. "How will you know?" "Because she'll really like us," explained Noah. "She won't pretend. And we'll feel like we can trust her," finished Mason. Brandon realized that his sons had developed a sharp intuition for genuine people. The suffering they had been through had made them capable of identifying authenticity in a way few adults can. 2 years later, on Brandon's birthday, something happened that no one expected. The triplets, now 15 years old, organized a surprise for their father. They had secretly invited all the families Brandon had helped over the years. More than 50 people showed up at the house, including Rachel and Sophie, Michael and his daughters, and dozens of other families. "Dad," said Ethan, acting as the spokesperson for his brothers, "we wanted to show you how many people you've helped." "How many children are safe because of you," added Noah. "And how our family has grown," finished Mason, pointing to all the people in the backyard. Brandon looked around and saw children playing, parents talking, grandparents telling stories. He saw families who had met through the support group and become friends. He saw children who had been protected from dangerous situations thanks to the guidance they received. Rachel approached him with Sophie, now a cheerful and confident 15-year-old. "Brandon, I want you to know that Sophie is in therapy to become a child psychologist. She wants to help children the way you helped her." "Really?" "She says she wants to be like you when she grows up," said Rachel, smiling. Sophie, now an articulate young woman, stepped closer. "Uncle Brandon, thank you for teaching my mom how to protect me, and thank you for showing that it's possible to turn bad things into good things." Brandon hugged the girl he had met, crying and scared, and who was now there, strong and determined to help other children. Mrs. Bennett, now 79 but still active, climbed onto a chair to make a speech. "Everyone, I want to say something. I raised 5 children. I have 12 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. But I've never seen a family grow and get stronger the way this family has. Brandon and the boys taught us that family isn't just about blood. It's about who chooses to be by your side in difficult times. It's about who protects, who cares, who truly loves. And look around," she continued. "All these families here are proof that when we help each other, everyone gets stronger." Mrs. Bennett's speech was followed by a round of applause. Brandon looked at his sons and saw in their eyes the same pride he felt in his heart. That night, after everyone had left, the family gathered in the living room to talk about the day. "It was the best party of my life," said Brandon. "Of our life," corrected Ethan. "Dad, do you think we'll keep helping other families when we grow up?" asked Noah. "If you want to, yes, but even if you take different paths, what you've learned about compassion and protection will stay with you forever." Mason, now a thoughtful teenager, made an observation that summed it all up. "Dad, we learned that the strongest family isn't the one that never has problems. It's the one that faces problems together and comes out more united on the other side." Brandon hugged his 3 sons, now almost his height, and felt a deep gratitude. They had faced terrible storms, but they emerged as better, stronger, more compassionate people. The journey that began with 3 children crying in the rain had turned into a protection network that spread throughout the region, touching the lives of hundreds of families. "You know you're my heroes, right?" he said. "And you are ours," the 3 replied at the same time, in a harmony they had never lost despite all they had been through. That night, Brandon looked out the bedroom window and saw Mrs. Bennett's house lit up. The quiet street in the neighborhood where they had rebuilt their lives, and he felt a deep peace. They had won. Not just survived, but truly won. And in the process, they had discovered that the greatest victory isn't just protecting those we love, but using our experience to protect everyone we can reach. The triplets grew up knowing they had been loved unconditionally, protected courageously, and that their worth never depended on the approval of those who didn't truly love them. And Brandon learned that sometimes true love takes courage to fight, strength to endure, and wisdom to turn pain into purpose. The end. And what did you think, dear listener, of this inspiring story of overcoming? Share in the comments what it was like to follow this emotional journey. Subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.